Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. Welcome to August 1st. It's hard to believe we're already in the month of August and summer is going so quickly, but I hope that you and yours are having a good summer so far. As always, keep up to date with all your summer weather at 1-800-472-0391. That is your connection by phone to the Alaska's National Weather Service forecast. You just use a couple numbers there and you will find the forecast that matters to you. No matter what, you can find us online at weather.gov/Alaska. From that page, you can go to any of our services, the forecast for Juneau, Fairbanks, or Anchorage, or any parts of South Central, the interior, West Coast, North Slope, or Southeast. And of course, if you can't find what you're looking for, make sure that you check in with me at david.snider@noaa.gov. That's your email link to questions and answers, and I'm happy to help in any way that I can. Something that you probably noticed in Juneau this month has been really warm and really dry, especially the last half of the month. It was one of the warmest on record, in fact. The highest maximum temperature set 2 daily record highs in a row, July 4th, Independence Day, and the 5th, the following day. Well, 2 wonderful days around Juneau, and really many other parts of Southeast experienced tremendously warm and dry weather as well. The lowest minimum temperature recorded in Juneau was on the 13th of July, about 47 degrees there. And when you average the monthly highs and the monthly lows together, we get an average temperature for the entire month of 61.2 degrees. That was 4.3 degrees above the average, which is normally 56.9. So yeah, if you thought it was a warm July in Juneau, it absolutely was. It was the warmest July on record. Now, as far as wind goes, it wasn't quite as windy as it could be. A 25-mile-an-hour wind was seen there. That was on July 10th. The wettest day was July 15th. Only 1.04 inches was collected in the rain barrel at Juneau. It was 10 days with measurable rain. That would be 0.01 inches or more. And 3 of those days had a ½ inch of rain or more. So it really didn't rain that much in July for Juneau, especially the second half of the month. The monthly rainfall was only 2.82 inches, and that was down almost 1 3/4 of an inch. The average is about 4.6 inches, so you can see a pretty big deficit there. In fact, one of the reasons that it was so warm was it was the driest July since 2009, and that makes a big difference in the sensible weather you have in Alaska's capital city. So hopefully you enjoyed July. As we already noticed, the weather is beginning to change across parts of Southeast. We'll talk about that in a minute, but one residual effect from your dry weather in July is this little patch of orange right here across the northern parts of Southeast. That is an elevated fire concern, some high fire danger around the Chilkat Valley there, and no surprise that fire danger is elevated with the lack of rainfall you've seen in places like that. But again, that will change. As we look in the interior, this will change as well. A pretty broad area of high and extreme fire danger across the central and eastern interior and down through the Copper River Valley. Not a big change from yesterday if you're tracking, but this is new up across the Chukchi coast there and inland a little bit. Pretty much dry weather there as well, and areas just west and north of Lake Iliamna. Now, you can always follow along and check your local fire conditions for more information. Make sure you check local burn bans as well, but always be careful with fire. The good news is rain is coming in, and as we look at the visible satellite picture, we can find where low pressure working across the Bering Sea is coming in from the west, and pretty much westerlies are blowing in off the Bering Sea and off the Pacific and pushing into the Gulf of Alaska. Now, this drier air controlled by high pressure has been kind of slow to give up the ghost across parts of Southeast, so we're seeing clouds move in, especially lower clouds. Gustavus has already had a little bit of rain in the last 24 hours. But by and large, you're still holding on to that drier weather. Not so for the central and western parts of the interior. Rain's already moving in today. More is expected to fall over the rest of the week and into the weekend. And we should expect that more areas in Alaska will be looking at rainfall than will be dry as we get toward your Friday and your Saturday. If we look at with infrared satellite picture, we saw a lot of high clouds moving into the region already, but down below, the sensible cloud cover that really is packing in any decent moisture is still pretty limited across the central and eastern Gulf and parts of southeast. That's not true for the interior. This very bright band of clouds here stretching from Fairbanks all the way out toward Ambler and Bettles and across south and western Alaska is loaded with moisture, and it is moving into your area with low pressure working just north and west of Gamble and Savunga. You can also see a bank of clouds across the north slope. That is separated by the rest of the mainland by some cooler air. A boundary here sitting across the Brooks Range will help to keep that coldest air out of the region, but just offshore, don't be surprised to see some rain and snow showers there. The main issue will be that onshore push of pretty wet air across most of the interior and southwestern Alaska as we go through today, tomorrow, and the next several days. High pressure is fairly weak, but it is there across south central. A trough of low pressure moving eastward, stirring up more clouds. Once again, earlier today and last night we had a little bit of light rain around Gustavus, but nothing too substantial. Clouds are filling in. That'll be the biggest change you'll see today. Low pressure across the southern Bering, drawing in those westerly winds across the central and eastern chain, and a broad area of rainfall moving up the south and west coast with low pressure across the Bering Sea and rainfall forming on the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range. And it'll stay there through the next several days. Looks like that trend will continue to keep things relatively wet, but not terribly unstable. While we may see some showers, the best risk for thunderstorm activity is probably going to be a little bit further east over in Canada. For tonight, the frontal boundary up north across the Brooks Range stays put. So the rain and snow shower area will probably stay out of most of your villages. Showers are expected across the west coast, southwest. Watch for areas of fog as well, and showers across the Brooks Range and the western Alaska Range. Once you move a little bit further east into the Copper River Valley, things should be a little bit drier, but we may have an opportunity for some pretty limited areas of rain across southeast. As you look out across the west, areas of fog, light rain should be expected there as a front lies over the Aleutians and into the Alaska Peninsula. As we get into Thursday, that cooler air out west moves its way into the Gulf, and we'll see a better chance of showers and rain across the Gulf. Winds are going to come up a little bit more too. You'll notice that pressure packing here is starting to condense a little bit more, and it really does so out across the western chain. You'll see that in the marine forecast in just a few minutes. Watch for areas in southeast to start to see more clouds as a ridge of high pressure moves out of the region a little bit more. You'll have a better chance for some light rainfall up and down the peninsula. And for parts of southeast, do expect to see some light rain showers there, especially across the upper Tanana and the upper Yukon Valley. A lot of this could miss the Fairbanks area. Showers will be in the region. Some of them could pass through, but the heavier amounts of rain will likely be all around, but perhaps not over the middle Tanana Valley. As we get into Friday, widespread showers are expected across the interior, south of the Brooks Range, all the way out toward the upper parts of the Yukon and Kuskokwim Delta regions. And warmer air is wrapping around the low pressure system in the Gulf of Alaska. What does that mean? That means most of southeast will be under the influences of this very warm and wet air mass, and winds will be blowing. You're going to see that again in the marine forecast here in just a minute. Watch for showers on the western side of this, and that will include Prince William Sound, most of the Kenai Peninsula, Cook Inlet, South Central, all the way across the Alaska Range, and then things start to dry out a little bit more. In fact, they might stabilize just enough to see some areas of fog early in the morning on Friday across the Yukon Delta from Amanak down toward Nunivak Island and the Kuskokwim Delta, but just to the west of that, including St. Paul and St. George, we're back into low pressure and areas of widespread rain. Areas of rain and some fog across the Aleutians should be expected as we get into Friday. Here's a look at your temperatures now. As we get into Thursday morning, things should be a little bit warmer as we're adding more cloud cover and moisture to the air. That should limit how fast we can cool off at nighttime, what limited time it still is. 30s and 40s across the north slope there and above freezing for just about everyone. 40s and 50s for the interior. Some areas in the upper Yukon will be fairly mild. South Central closer to 50 degrees. Most of the west also near 50 degrees. St. Paul about 48. And 50s and 60s for parts of southeast. As we look at Prince William Sound Thursday afternoon, your temperatures will probably be mitigated by clouds and rain, looking for highs no more than 60 degrees. Cook Inlet expecting temperatures in the mid to upper 60s at best, though that may be cooling down as we add more rain to the forecast. Upper 60s to lower 70s across the upper Yukon Valley and the middle Tanana Valley. above freezing in the North Slope, 30s and 40s for you, including Prudhoe Bay, about 41. Southeast temperatures back in the mid-60s, no 70s for you this time, 58 in Kodiak, 53 in St. Paul, and 50s and 60s for the chain. Morning temperatures on Friday, still in the 40s and 50s for most of the interior. The North Slope above freezing for everyone, 40 around Wainwright. South Central back in the mid-50s, Kodiak 51, Falls Pass, Cold Bay in the lower 50s there. Sandpoint about the same, and mid-50s for Southeast. High temperatures for Friday afternoon. Still fairly mild for the interior, but you're not seeing that late summer heat bursting in anytime soon. 70 in Fort Yukon, 67 in Fairbanks. Tanana looking at temps in the mid-60s. McGrath also seeing a mild day around 64.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to aviation weather now, IFR conditions are going to spread out across the entire region, especially for the Gulf of Alaska. Will continue across the Bering Sea and the Aleutians, and a lot of the west coast will start out under widespread IFR for your Thursday morning. All of this is due to that rain that's moving in from southwest to north and east and will eventually spread out over more of the interior, but not just yet. The Alaska Range will suffer first with MVFR conditions starting out across the west and some of the northern passes. You'll notice some parts around the upper Yukon and into the upper Tanana Valley. We'll be looking at some MVFR. MVFR also becomes a little more widespread inside of southeast and across the northern sections of Alaska. Watch for IFR to continue there across the North Slope with MVFR stretching down toward the northern slopes of the Brooks Range. Now, a lot of this will improve with daytime heating. We still have plenty of that to go around, and it looks like some of that will improve the situation across the interior and certainly across the North Slope. You'll notice the IFR pulling back as we get into the afternoon. Also look for some improvements across southeast. We'll scrub out some of that IFR, but notice that MVFR also fills in the gaps. So conditions will improve, but only on a limited basis there for southeast. For Prince William Sound, down through the Resurrection Bay, Barren Islands, Kodiak Island, and still across the southwest coast up through and into the Bering Strait, IFR conditions are expected to continue. You'll see some improvements around Cold Bay and Falls Pass, especially south and west of Sandpoint to just south of Dutch Harbor and Unalaska, but not quite to Nikolsky. IFR conditions may ease a little bit there Thursday afternoon. You'll see more improvement across the Pacific coast of the Alaska Peninsula as we go through Friday morning. IFR conditions continue across the central and the eastern Gulf, with MVFR lingering across parts of central and southern southeast. But MVFR starts to spread into more parts of the interior. They're still leaving some holes around Fairbanks and the Tanana Valley, in the middle anyway. And South Central starts to see more MVFR. IFR conditions for the north coast. The west coast still looking at widespread IFR conditions, including Bethel. But St. Paul and St. George, very close, but right now, not quite. Looking at IFR to continue there for Friday morning. And that trend lingers as we get into Friday afternoon. MVFR spreads up and down the Yukon Valley, and especially in the upper valley there in the Yukon Flats. Look for mixed areas of MVFR and IFR for the North Slope. And IFR conditions continue across the Gulf while we see improvements for South Central, and Southeast still lingers under widespread MVFR for your Friday. Here's Thursday's pass conditions. Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass right now look to be MVFR through most of the day. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass we expect to lean over toward IFR conditions as the afternoon goes on tomorrow. Rainy Pass looking at an MVFR start and an IFR finish for your Thursday. Windy Pass, marginal conditions most of the day. Expect similar trends there in Isabel Pass. Mentasta Pass right now looks to be on the eastern edge of this. There will be MVFR if you head just a little bit further west, but right now Mentasta Pass looks to be okay. Tanita Pass, we expect VFR start and an MVFR finish there with rain moving in as we go throughout the afternoon. Portage Pass looking to head over to IFR after starting a little bit on the marginal side. And then for Chilkoot and White Pass looking for marginal conditions most of the day. Freezing levels indicate that we've got a lot of warm air out there. With a westerly flow moving in, you see 10, 12, and 14,000 foot levels across the Bering Sea. Some of that's spreading into the Gulf, and our cold air right now is still trapped up across the North Slope. The surface freezing line is right there north of Kaktovik. Just south of that, all the way down toward the Brooks Range summits, we quickly rise to about 8,000 feet for freezing levels and around 10,000 feet or so for a large part of southeastern Alaska on Thursday morning. What about icing potential though? There really isn't a huge significant icing threat below 10,000 feet. You can see just a hint of some isolated moderate north of Barrow and Utqiagvik, but right now any widespread activity across the mainland, southwest, southeast, or south central doesn't look to be in the forecast for Thursday. What about the jet stream? A strong push from the west continues across the Bering. Wind speeds around 100 to 150 knots. Another westerly flow across the north slope zipping by at 50 knots. And we also see a stronger southwesterly flow across the west coast of the United States. Low pressure right now is dominating our weather pattern. And below at 9,000 feet, you can see that playing out here. A strong southwesterly flow across the Gulf and into southeast, 20 to 40 knots. Southerlies across the mainland, 10 to 15, and northerlies down the west coast, 25 to 30, and much stronger flow out across the chain, 50 to 60 knots. Similar trends at 3,000 feet with low pressure anchored across the northern Gulf waters. Again, a southerly flow for the mainland, west coast winds coming in from the north, 30 to 40 knots, and southwesterlies over southeast around 20 knots. So what about turbulence? Looks like we're going to have some isolated bumps there across the southwestern Capes, Nunivak Island, across the Barren Islands just north and east of Kodiak Island, south of Homer, but the biggest bumps will be across the Aleutians for your Thursday. Welcome to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and joining us once again is our good friend Eric Stevens from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska. He is here and has been here many times to talk to us about weather satellites and how those can help Alaskans understand our weather, how we can do better detection, keep more people safe from things even like volcanic ash. But today, Eric, you're going to talk to us a little bit more about weather satellites and how that can keep Alaskans safe and protect our property from wildfire, right?
That's right, Dave. Today's topic is where there's smoke, there's fire. And thanks for having us back again to Alaska
Anytime.
Weather. Well, weather satellites have a lot of different instruments on them. It turns out that the electromagnetic spectrum has a lot going on in it, and only one part of that is visible light, what we see.
Right.
Weather satellites, of course, report that. Today's topic is wildfires.
Okay.
There are some people who say that in Alaska in the summertime you don't have severe weather. These people are usually from Oklahoma or somewhere, and F5 tornadoes tend not to occur in Alaska.
Right.
People have also said what we do have in the summer. What is Alaska's severe summer weather can be hydrology,
Right.
flash flood and erosion in the mountains and things like that, and fires, wildfires.
Absolutely.
Those were here in 2004, certainly remember that. We've got an example here from 2014. Now it was a quiet season overall, but in May, down on the Kenai Peninsula, we had a wildfire on the Funny River, and this is a satellite image from a satellite, a polar orbiter that went right over Alaska, and we can see the plume of smoke coming out of that fire on the Kenai, curling down. It's caught in the wind.
Right.
It goes down toward Kodiak Island, curves around. You can see it circulating around a low pressure system that's in the Gulf of Alaska.
It was a beautiful picture.
Oh my gosh.
Except there was a fire.
There's a fire there. The nice thing is with this satellite image, you can tell where the fire origin is, where
Right.
the smoke is coming from. And it's a color image. We're looking at the wavelength spectrum of about 0.4 to 0.7 micrometers or microns. That's what the human eye would see. If you were riding on the satellite and looked down, you could see this kind of an image.
Right.
So that's pretty nice. But it turns out there's more to the electromagnetic spectrum than just visible light.
Okay.
You've heard of infrared, ultraviolet, that kind of thing. If we move into longer wavelengths, let's go to one specifically, 3.7 microns.
Okay, 3.7.
Why worry about that one? Well, we've got an example here. 3.7, it turns out, happens to be very sensitive to a certain temperature range, temperatures where fires burn.
Okay.
And so we've got an example zoomed in a little more from that same Funny River fire down on the Kenai Peninsula, and we can see that you get up into a few hundred degrees Fahrenheit,
Right.
and that's where the colors are. We can see there on the Funny River fire to the west and to the east, almost a horseshoe shape there, is not only we're seeing where the fire is in a general sense, but specifically where it's the active fire
That is where
front.
it's burning right now.
And it's
Amazing.
3.7 microns is the important temperature there.
Okay.
That's right.
So this is really important to firefighters on the ground, people that are making plans and directing the firefighters on where they need to go and cut the trenches and keep people safe.
You know it. If you want to fight that fire, you got to know where it is.
Okay.
You got to know the leading edge. We've also got a movie loop, nothing quite like animating it in time.
Yeah.
You can see the fire spreading out over time with a succession of film or a succession of images. Now this is one channel, 3.7 micron. You know, we looked at that color smoke image before.
Right.
And that's actually a red, a green, and a blue. That's how you get color imagery. What if you took 3 different wavelengths in the infrared? You went from like 2 2.2 micron, 1.5 micron, up to 3.7. You mix them together, you get this other kind of color image, which is even a better way to sharply bring out the details of where that leading edge of the fire is.
Okay.
You'll note, though, in the infrared, guess what? We don't see the smoke. That's too bad. And on these movie loops, you can see the clouds go by. These channels can't see through clouds. The lesson is there's no one perfect solution. You got to have the visible, you got to have some of that infrared single 3.7 channel, some of the infrared mixing to help get a different perspective. Another one, we've talked before about a fun channel called the day-night band.
Yes, one of my favorites.
Oh yeah, and in Alaska in the winter, it's great. We've got all this darkness. The day-night band is so sensitive to seeing light. You can see features that otherwise aren't available. Now in Alaska, when you have a forest fire, it tends to be light out all the time. It's our summer. But we can go down south to the Rim Fire in California in 2013. Now, okay, it was in California, not Alaska, but Alaskan crews went down to fight that fire, so we can talk about it here on Alaska Weather. Here we have a 3.7 micron channel shot of the rim fire, again, kind of a horseshoe shape, showing that active fire front down there. And then we'll look again to the day-night band, the visible light, and then you can see how the fire is all bright. You can see the active fire front and actually the city lights over there too. Turns out that the cities, while they're active in a social sense, are not really hot in a fire sense. So they don't show up in the 3.7 micron. They're not hot like a fire is, but the fire in the cities look the same from a visible light perspective. And a fun thing here too is that we can see the smoke plume going north from the rim fire on the day-night band. So if we were ever to have, like in 2004 in Alaska, you get dark at night, we still had an active fire season that year. That was, you know, that really bad year. The day-night band didn't exist then, but if we had fires now in August, we could use it then. The lesson here is weather satellites, they offer many different wavelengths of light. Some are used for different purposes, and some of these we just looked at tonight are especially helpful here in Alaska to find and to track the behavior of these wildfires so the crews can go out there and do their jobs.
Sure. So a satellite toolbox for the firefighting crews and the fire weather forecasters, and it just underlines how important satellites are, especially for Alaska and our mission for the National Weather Service to protect life and property, and also to enhance the national economy. So wonderful stuff there, Eric. And people can look at pictures like this anytime by going to gina.alaska.edu. You'll find images there all around Alaska at various times of the year, and not just about fire weather, but volcanic ash and smoke and anything else you want to check out. They're always beautiful pictures and always interesting to look at no matter what time of the day. Thanks again for joining us, Eric. We appreciate it and welcome you back anytime. For this edition of Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. See you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Moving on to marine weather, you'll notice the hot spots are still there across southeastern Alaska and the inside passage, especially through the Clarence Strait, and some of the inside waters further northward. Norton Sound still looking pretty warm with temperatures at or above 15, even 16 degrees C, and that goes for the upper Kotzebue Sound region as well. We are noticing some warmer water moving just to Barrow and northward and past that. So it is interesting to watch how quickly this is moving eastward, and will have some effect on the marginal ice zone that we see between Wainwright and Barrow there. You can see that concentrations are below 80% at least, and some of this is probably considerably lower than that. The blue areas, though, one way to denote the ice coverage, and the white areas, of course, are above 80%. We're still looking at concentrations that are higher as you move north and east of Dead Horse, and certainly closer to Kaktovik. But with that warmer water moving northward, we would expect to see some of this moving around as well. And with the latest weather patterns changing, ice will be on the move as we head through the rest of the week. Let's take a look at southeast forecast as we go through your Thursday. Southerlies in the Lynn Canal, 25 knots with 5-foot seas there. Winds not as fast as you move southward through Stevens Passage and Clarence Strait, 2 to 3 foot seas. Outer coast winds looking at light southwesterly flow around 10 knots with 5 to 6 foot seas on Thursday, but things change as we get into Friday. Remember, low pressures here across the central Gulf, and that's really starting to crank up the winds from the south and east as high pressure starts to move out of the way. You're going to see winds coming up in Juneau to about 35 knots for gusts. Seas holding around 4 feet, 7-foot seas there for Clarence Strait, and seas on the outer coast ranging from about 10 to 11 feet. For South Central, winds come up in Prince William Sound to about 15 knots. From the east, a 2-foot seas expected. Southeasterlies crossing the Kenai Peninsula, 15 to 25 knots, 4 to 6-foot seas across the Gulf. As you get into Cook Inlet, seas will hold around 3 to 5 feet there, some of the highest just south of Kenai and Clam Gulch. As we get into Friday, winds will reverse course as low pressure shifting eastward. We get into more of a northeasterly draw. 15 to 20 knots coming down the inlet, looking for 5 to 6-foot seas there, and 9 to 11-foot seas across the northern Gulf, just outside of Resurrection Bay and outside of Prince William Sound. In the Sound itself, northwesterlies 20 knots with a 3-foot sea. For Thursday, Bristol Bay winds will be out of the southwest, 15 knots with 4-foot seas, 7-foot seas down the Bering Sea coast. West and northwesterly winds still going from AKwx all the way down towards Sand Point, 7 to 9 feet there. Inside of Shelikof Strait, a southwesterly flow, 10 knots with 3-foot seas. The winds come up in all areas as we head into Friday. North and westerly winds being drawn into low pressure in the central Gulf. High pressure up north and a new storm coming in from the west will keep winds going, looking for about 9 to 10-foot seas in just about all areas in the Pacific, 4-foot seas in Shelikof Strait, and 8-foot seas down the Bering Sea coast to wrap up the week. For the Aleutians, west and southwesterlies are expected 25 to 30 knots in all areas, 8 to 10 feet for most of the central chain. The Pacific coast looking at 11 to 12 feet. And for the west, anywhere from 12 to 13-foot seas as higher seas are moving in. And you can see that with the bluer shades here indicating about 15 to 20 foot seas coming in. Those will quickly spread eastward, and here are the Pribilofs for point of reference. You'll notice those higher seas spreading quickly to the east. As you look across central and eastern parts of the chain for Friday, 25 knots with 9 to 10-foot seas there, still holding on to 30-foot seas in the west with 13 to 15-foot seas on your Friday afternoon. For the west coast on Thursday, north and westerly winds are expected 20 knots in just about all areas with the exception of the St. Paul and St. George areas. 6-foot seas are expected, 4 to 6-foot seas as we get a little bit further north, and in Norton Sound, 4-foot seas with the easterly flow at 20 knots. As we get into Friday, northwesterlies diminish there to 15 knots, 3-foot seas. As you move southward, you'll find 4 to as high as 7-foot seas in the Kuskokwim Delta. For the Pribilofs, 25 knots with 8-foot seas. And notice those higher seas we just saw when we were looking at the Aleutians, those are still just west of the Pribilofs as we go into your Friday afternoon. For Thursday, over the ice, remember, northeasterlies there, 10 to 15 knots, 3-foot seas around Barrow as you head down the Chukchi coast, 25 knots with 7 to 8-foot seas, lighter winds outside of Kotzebue Sound. Easterly winds remain across the Beaufort Sea and over the ice, 15 knots, 3 to 5-foot seas down the Chukchi coast, and winds come up 20 to 30 knots from Wainwright to Point Lay down toward Cape Lisburne and Point Hope as we look at your Friday afternoon. Let's recap tonight's weather. It's going to rain in more parts of the interior as we go toward the end of the week, and certainly across the west and southwestern coast. Rain and clouds will start to pick up across parts of southeast as we get into your Thursday and especially Friday and Saturday, with another wave of weather working across the Gulf. As this strengthens a little bit more on Friday, watch for the winds to come up across southeast. You'll also be looking at some gusty winds across parts of Kodiak Island, the Alaska Peninsula, and especially the eastern chain. Seas coming up in the southern and western Bering as well. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.